I will say, Vicky, every time I see your background, I'm sad there's not like cats playing on that fantastic looking jungle gym you have.
Yeah, me too. They're kind of in this mode where they want to hang out down in the basements, which is really irritating.
I mean,
But yesterday they were up here again, so I
Right.
think,
like this is what cats do, right? Like the opposite of whatever you want them to do.
yeah, and one of them's new, so they're just trying to get to know each other and really, you know, kind of bond. So I want to go down and grab them and bring them up here, but it's like, no, let them take everything at their own pace. Which is a shame because one of them I like showing off because he's polydactyl.
Oh, cool.
He's super cute. I mean, they're both super duper cute, but the polydactyl one is kind of ridiculous.
Nice.
Hey guys.
Hey, Cam.
I think the first time I saw a polydactyl cat was this year, actually. I went to the Hemingway house in Key West.
Oh, so you saw all the polydactyl cats.
Yep, yep. They said they don't specifically, because I guess what they do now, they're a zoo, which is really funny. That's the only reason they can have all those cats. But they said like every year when there's a new litter of kittens, they pick like the four healthiest or something like that, and then they spay and neuter the rest to control population. And so they don't specifically pick out the polydactyl cats, but just through the nature of everything, they've ended up with a lot of them.
I learned after I got Osgood that sailors thought polydactyl cats were good luck. And so they preferred to try and get a polydactyl cat on their ships, which means polydactyl cats are more common around port areas. And Portland, despite, we're slightly inland, but we are a legitimate working port. So,
Nice.
yeah, so that's kind of cool. I had no idea.
Oh, I've missed everything leading up to that, but I have a polydactyl cat in Florida. So we got near the seashore. So
See,
that's a thing.
we can bond about our polydactyl cats, Chris.
There you go. Mine's called Precious.
Mine's called Osgood.
Good name.
Oh, all right. I think this is all we're gonna get. There's a ton of people in Dublin today, and that's great because all right, let me start at the beginning. So for anyone who's new, this is technically the tools working group meeting, but we've been hijacking it for the SBOM Everywhere SIG. And so anyone here for tools working group, you're gonna be disappointed probably, but that's fine. So I'm gonna paste the tools agenda into the chat, which is where we sign in, but then there's an agenda for the SIG, which is the second link where we don't sign in to make it confusing, I guess. And so what I was thinking we should do today, because there's so many people missing from well, in fact, I don't think any of the people who currently have any of the GitHub issues assigned to them are here. Wait, Cameron and Bunny, I think of some, but anyway, everyone's in Dublin. And so I would like to turn this into a working group session and focus on this issue here, which is one of the complaints Vicky had. I shouldn't say complaint, that sounds negative.
I mean, it's totally fair. It was a complaint. Sorry.
It's good feedback.
I apologize.
No, not at all. And it's to kind of break it. We have goals and purpose defined in the mobilization plan, but we've never like sucked them out and put them somewhere that people can find them and clean them up. Because I'm sure, just given the nature of time, what we documented, like 6 months ago now, is probably not quite as valid as it once was. And so if anyone wants to bail, that's great, that's fine. Don't feel like you have to hang out and work on this. But I think it would be the best use of time, just because we can't go through these issues. And all right, so I will create a Google Doc to remember how to do that. And I'll share my
While you're doing that, can I
What's that?
give while you're doing that, can I give some background for how this has been managed in the two other existing SIGs on this?
Please do.
So let me lower my hand before I forget now. So the other two SIGs for working for, sorry, still early for me, mobilization plan streams. The other two that exist so far are education and incident response team, CERT, the firefighters, so to speak. Now, coincidentally, those both ended up under CROB. They have been adopted by the best practices working group and by the vulnerability disclosures working group. So what each of them did is exactly the same because they're run by the same person. And what we did is took the text from the existing work stream stuff from that big document, mobilization plan, slapped it down and said, okay, let's look at this critically now that we're not racing to get something out the door for Washington. Let's see, can we actually do what we promised? In what order should we do it? What are the potential budget numbers? You know, like what's first year, what's second year, what's beyond? And is there anything we missed? Do we have to scope this better or define things better or throw things out completely? And what we've ended up with in each case is a much tighter, more focused view of what we're going to do, with more of a roadmap that is now being broken into smaller groups and committees that are going off and adding additional details before it all gets put back together, handed to the TAC or the board or whoever does financing thing for mobilization plan, which is a TAC question that I'm just going to totally dodge right now. So that's essentially what we did. We took the mobilization plan text, critically looked at it, did a $6 million man on the thing, and now it is stronger, faster, better. And now we're going to start to hopefully execute on that. So that's what they did, and it seems to work really well. But full disclosure, what they did took a couple of months of weekly calls. It really took a lot of work to look at these things, and it's totally valuable because it's really great stuff that we ended up with. But just want to set expectations for everyone. While we'd be starting that process today, it sounds like, Josh, you'll clarify, I'm sure if I'm wrong, but if we start that process today, I don't expect we'll finish it today, but I think we can at least start to set a good trajectory for it.
Yeah, totally.
I'll shut up now.
No, that was super valuable. I mean, thank you, Vicky. I truly appreciate it. Okay, I put a link in the document to can we enable GitHub pages? I don't even know what GitHub pages are, Cameron.
Yeah, it's just like to compile the documentation into a fully qualified domain. Yeah, it's just like a GitHubism for generating static site out of the documentation in the repo.
Why do we? I don't know if we want that. That's
no, totally fair, totally fair. I didn't know like if one of the messaging items is like an easier to ingest form of consumption around the actual technical documentation process. So it's TBD, and it's just a suggestion. So
I'm gonna ignore that for now. Well, we can talk about that later.
fair enough. Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna just share my screen, and I'm not worried about hands up or anything. Just jump in if someone has something to say, because I think I'm not going to be paying attention to Zoom. Let me move this out of the way. I assume everyone can see this. So, do you have something, Vicky?
Oh, sorry. A, I didn't know I was off mute, and B, I accidentally closed your comment, Cameron. I'm sorry, I meant to comment on it.
No, totally, totally cool.
I think we can unclose. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm working on that.
I'm so
I'll
bad
fix
at
that. Sorry.
Google Docs.
Offline too.
It's actually really funny too, because like my wife has taken an enormous amount of like Excel training and office training and stuff. And so she's really good at all this. And she mocks me because like if I have to do something with data, I export an Excel spreadsheet to CSV, I write a Python script to modify it, and then I re-import it. Like that's how I do things. But anyway, all right.
You know,
so page
you get shit done, and that's what matters.
That's right. Not pretty. All right. So if we look at page 44, this is the mobilization plan, which if you go to in the issue 12, I just updated the link. We had a link to a PDF that no longer exists apparently, but hopefully this URL will stay. This issue currently has no owner. Brandon Lum mentioned he might be willing to pick up and help out, but I'll track him down later. But anyway, right. If you click the link, you get here and then they have a read the plan, which brings you to whatever this is. And page 44 is kind of where we'll start. And this is where, I don't know how many pages, it's not a lot. The SBOM everywhere, yeah, it's only 4 pages. This one was definitely not as lengthy as some of the others, which is good because I'm lazy and I don't want to do all that. All right, so what I'm gonna do to start, I guess, is just copy and paste a bunch of text into this document here. Can someone fix that? And then
Fix what?
What's
What do
that?
you need?
I
see.
This in the doc.
The
I just
numbering.
did That
Bah,
whatever.
okay.
I
Yep.
blame Google. Okay, and then I think this is a nice chunk, which I will also paste down at the bottom. And of course, none of this will be formatted, which is great. And then what is this? Initial implementation. This makes sense, I think. And then obviously we'll move all this to GitHub at some point in the near future. And then there's the levels, which I think are worth defining. And badging and advocacy, I'm going to skip for the moment, because I think those will just be part of the rest. And then there's costs and goals. Vicky, how much of the other groups have focused on like costs? Have they done any of that?
Yeah, there were very, very rough numbers around each of them. Like,
Okay.
we're going to, this is something we need to staff. Right, here's a
Yes.
function, we will need to staff the function. We're going to assume staffing a function is $300,000, right? They just made some wild ass guess and used that number for every single thing like that.
Okay, well, I mean, these already have wild ass guesses, so we can probably start with that. And then I'll grab that, and then there's beyond first year annual goals and costs. Oh, this looks awful. I don't know where this came from, or I'd steal the original. All right, can I ask, can some people grab a section
Yeah.
of this and kind of format it? I know Vicky's working on the top.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah, I actually stopped because I was clobbering someone else's work.
Okay, what about the second paragraph? Who can someone volunteer for this?
Yeah, I will grab the second paragraph.
Right. Vicky's gonna do the second. Someone is down here. Great, thank you. What about the initial implementation section? Can I get a volunteer for that?
Yeah, I can take that.
Thanks, Cameron. This one's going good. We've got this thing here. Then.
You
can
want the
someone-
headers?
Excuse me?
You want the headers?
Yeah, I mean, sure. We want to make
Okay.
it readable and look nice so we can work on it. So, and of course, if you do the work, you get to do it your way, which is the best part. Awesome. Thank you. And I will grab this one here. Goals and costs. And also don't like overthink any of this, anyone, because we're gonna move all this at some point. So Well, that went a lot faster than I expected. Teamwork makes the dream work. All right, cool. All right. All right, let's start at the top then and work our way down. Oops, so I'm pushing wrong buttons. All right, so I'm just gonna read aloud, and if anyone has comments, jump in, add comments to the doc. We can edit the doc in real time. Like, I'm pretty flexible here. I'm a pretty big proponent of if you do the work, you get to do it your way. So, all right, we have been enabling SBOMs everywhere, improve the security posture of entire open source ecosystem, producing consumers, maintainers. Just publishing SBOMs is insufficient. They need to be proactively used. Removing substantial barriers to further SBOM adoption lies in ensuring that. Does anyone have any issues with this like preamble clause?
Well, yeah, what they're unqualified, like to me, substantial barriers. And then I don't know, do you think that SBOM just in general from a procedural and type perspective is maintained or we've arrived at some level of consensus at that, or do we just kind of take the position of, hey, go implement this broad thing and bring it back and we can discuss? I don't
We
know.
will not be defining SBOM. CISA is defining SBOM. And so whatever
Okay.
CISA says it is what we're going to agree to.
Copy.
Yep. And if there's definitions from upstream that need explanation, we will create like subgroups for that, because that's going to be a pretty wild conversation, I suspect.
Yeah, I'd be interested in like creating a glossary. Right on.
I think.
So as far as
has-
glossary, the Education and Best Practices Working Group SIG is going to be taking on creating a glossary for all things OpenSSF. That work is only just kind of started, but it's something that will be happening, because every single venue that I'm in, somebody says, holy shit, why don't we have a glossary? And everyone's like, it's like, yes, we're going to make a glossary. So
which group did you say
what-
Vicky's doing that?
I don't remember. It's one of Krobe's. I believe it's the education or best practices, probably best practices, because that's the working group. But that work has only just sort of started as a what if, wouldn't it be nice? But they're going to be picking it up in future weeks after all of this Dublin stuff settles down.
Okay, great, good, because I don't want to do that. Okay, so. What the other thing you mentioned, Cameron, was the word substantial.
Yeah, I guess like removing the substantial barriers to further SBOM adoption. To be fair, I did not read through to see if that's broached to define what substantial barriers exist.
It's not defined at all. And this is actually, we have that other issue about barriers to adoption. Barriers to adoption 13. To kind of discuss some of that. And as you can imagine, there's no consensus on any of this. Yeah, which I mean, Steve's already disagreeing with me about bias, which is fine. But and yeah, we don't have data, right? It's just all made up shit at this point. So this word substantial, that's a marketing term at this point in this document. I'm comfortable removing it. Does anyone have any complaints?
But let me, since I'm just seeing this for the first time, let me be the ignorant noob, which is actually true. And so I see SBOM everywhere. Is the purpose of this group really to scope what we do to achieve the ultimate end? I mean, that'll help me, couch my comments and thoughts. So You know, I see this as, you know, because I see certain things already. You know, is this a security focus group? We're trying to get SBOMs adopted everywhere and architect the ways to get that done, or what we can do to support that for the purpose of improving security. Is
Have
that
you, oh yeah, have you read the mobilization plan? That kind of defines what kind of a very high level of what the purpose of SBOM everywhere is. I can grab the
I
link.
don't think I've been scanning the docs that were put in the links, and I haven't seen anything that this doc, you know, that we're working on here, the pieces that are being chunked out were the parts that I was just reading, right? So
Sure. So the intent is not specifically security minded, but it's understood that security use cases will drive kind of phase one of SBOM. And that, I don't know if that got written down, but it was definitely a talking point during the creation of all of this.
because you know, because I don't know if that I think I would argue that premise. I know we're all talking security, but I think it's easily possible that economics, you know, will really drive even the first wave. Yeah, I get the caveat in there. Maybe the first wave really is driven by security, but anyways, I'm just trying to. I don't want to take up all the cycles. You guys are being very efficient here, but I'm just trying to figure out, get my head around what it is we're trying to achieve with this SIG.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's a really good question.
So it says security right in the very first paragraph. I mean, first sentence, right? By enabling SBOMs everywhere, we can improve the security posture of the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I think that's you've got an excellent point there, Chris. It would be kind of nice to have some sort of mission statement, right? Here's our elevator pitch for SBOM everywhere. Boom. And maybe we have we stub out a section where we can fill that in after we have got the big picture kind of hammered back into shape, which is what kind of this process is starting. And then once we have done that, then we can swing back around and go, okay, now let's summarize that into their 1 or 2 lines. And this is our mission statement.
And I mean, for
Would
what
that
it's
work?
worth, this sentence is kind of what I've been running off of since the start of all this. And it can be cleaned up. I won't deny that, but security use case and bringing SBOMs everywhere.
And, you know, I'm not saying that, I'm not even suggesting that might not be correct. I'm just trying to figure out this specific SIG, what are we trying to achieve? And if it's, you know, to promote security, you know, and follow that thread, you know, that's, you know, very likely a worthy goal. But as we get down, you know, and I see Stephen here, you know, anybody who's heard me yap much, you know, knows, I think right now, I think one of the big barriers, you know, in all of this, and maybe this SIG isn't really the place to tackle it, but I see some signs that it, you know, that it's influenced by it as well, is where the hell we're actually going, right? And I think as we get into a lot of the atomic issues we deal with one at a time right now, we spend a lot of time working on individual, you know, things because none of us have really looked at where this all goes. So I like that, you know, that's what keyed me in the SBOMs everywhere title in this. You know, is this the forum to try to figure that out? And, you know, while I'm on the soapbox, you know, as I scan through the docs, you know, some of the things about tools, you know, developing tools and so forth, I think that speaks to somebody needs to define what is the tool space, which has a lot to do with, you know, in 3 years and 5 years and 7 years for, you know, specifically in that sort of range, what are we, you know, what are we going to be doing? Anyways.
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe this isn't the forum for it, but you know, the title just caught my eye and.
No, that's great. And it's, yeah, we're working on it, right? Like I think you're pretty far out ahead of us at the moment. But
you know, the whole, I gotta say, you know, the whole VEX thing from the moment I heard that, you know, I think it's an artifact of that. I mean, do VEX
Sure.
documents need to be created for things? Maybe. You know, did the industry benefit by spending these resources over this time squirreling on that? No. And I think the answer is really in how you combine all this crap, which is, you know, that 3, 5, 7 year out stuff.
Sure. All right.
Yeah, and that's being worked on in the various different SBOM formats as well. So that's not simply with us. Tracy has had her hand up, so you go, girl.
Hey, thanks. First of all, I don't have the link to this doc that we're looking at. I looked to everywhere and I couldn't find it. So if you could put it in the agenda doc so it can be referenced. Secondly, I think that there's some good little chunks of text in that we can bring up and just create a common scope. And I don't feel like we have a clear scope, and that's what we're talking about. Adoption should be in the scope. How do we, I think that the scope should really be focused on this team should be coming up with ways to make the adoption of SBOMs and the consumption of SBOMs easy. And while we do not have good data, there is one big barrier that we should list, and that is the nature of CD pipelines that requires everything to be manually updated. Every single workflow has to be manually updated if a company suddenly decides that they want to generate an SBOM. That is one of the biggest barriers. I hear it every day from people. So let's take a Jenkins pipeline. You might have 400, 500 workflows. Every single workflow is going to have to be updated. So there are barriers that we can start listing that we know are not just marketing, but are real. So I feel like that up here, that we could improve the security posture. I think that is I don't know if we have to say that because this is the whole point. What we have to say though, way up front, is that there is a lack of leveraging SBOM data and the adoption of SBOM generation that we need to address.
Can you add that somewhere in this document? I agree with you 100%.
I just added a comment to make sure we don't lose it somewhere.
And part of this as well that we should keep in mind is, so like everything Tracy just said is captured in number 2, we'll say badly because number 2 is so vaguely written. And these were all things discussed in the initial setup of this document, which was done, I guess, very cloak and dagger, which frustrated me greatly, but that's another story. And the decision was made to not explicitly list all of that because we'd have a 700-page document instead of a 60-page document for the mobilization plan. And so it was pared back substantially. But I think now is the time we can list all of that because it's important. And I think we need to spell it out because my assumptions are not Tracy's assumptions, which are not Vicky's assumptions. And that's problematic because then we end up in situations where I think I'm talking about one thing and you think I'm talking about another.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really what we did in the other 2 SIGs is make sure that we have no assumptions. We are spelling things out because we have the space to do so. We're not constrained by like 1 or 2 pages for this big wieldy idea.
Exactly that. All right. So I'm removing substantial because that's a marketing term and I don't like it. So and it's one of those words that I think people get stuck on. Okay, so requirements needed to build use cases using SBOMs. So the use cases, we have an issue for here, that's 3. So I want to make a note of that because essentially what I want to do is I don't want us to spend a month in this document necessarily. I want us to farm this out into like subgroups. Friction free, the tools, I think that one is hard. Do we have an issue for tools? Not really.
I did start putting in, do I need to raise my hand?
No, you're fine.
Dad,
Okay.
There's not enough people.
I started a list on just like basically tooling that I saw as more or less prevalent in kind of like my day-to-day. So I don't know if that's something we want to be mindful of from a tooling perspective, or if we want to nullify all prior understandings to start fresh from a tooling discovery effort.
No, I
oh
don't wanna
God,
start
no.
fresh.
I
Okay,
don't even
yeah.
want us to do this at all. I want us to contribute to existing efforts for this
Yes.
because they are out there already. SPDX and Cyclone DX both are working on their own separate lists of tools. And we should get these kids to play nicely in a sandbox and all work together on a single set of tools. My one comment on this is this tool is about generating SBOMs. Yeah, that's great, whatever. There's lots of tools that can help you generate an SBOM to varying degrees of specificity. There aren't a lot of tools and people aren't really talking enough about consumption of SBOMs. And then what do you do with an SBOM after you get it? And that is the major problem. I don't care if you hand me an SBOM, but what I'm doing is sticking it in a share drive somewhere and saying, yeah, I've got an SBOM, and tick that box on my compliance form, whatever. It's not going to help me find any sort of compliance or security issues. So we need to make sure that any list of tools is not focused purely on creation, but also includes consumption and analyzing SBOMs, right?
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that, but I will warn you all now that this list was written purely with the view of creation. So I do think consumption is hugely important, but nothing we're going to look at covers consumption in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and actually to that point right there, right? I think that it's TBD on what even minimally needs to be represented, I think. And also, I believe that every tool listed has an output format capability. And so if you kind of take an iterative approach to trying to understand the generation process and visualize that in a meaningful way, I think that might help on the back end on consumption.
I think there's value in that, but I also think that's work that's happening elsewhere that we should be able to leverage elsewhere rather than doing it ourselves. I also am pretty concerned that we might rat hole on the front end and then never get to the end, right? It's like, oh, let me pick up this really cool new hobby and then never get to the end. And I see that's the sort of approach that the entire industry is mostly taken to SBOMs, is getting focused on the creation rather than the end side. Yeah, Chris and I, yeah, you see, we've got the polydactyl cats together. We're going to be singing from the same playbook on this one.
I agree completely, Vicky. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, so everything people are saying here is valuable, but I would rather we let other people work on that and we look at the areas where no one else is addressing as much. I mean, acknowledge and point people to other things that are already happening, but yeah.
So Vicky, are you saying that we should focus more on the adoption and consumption, or we should focus more on the tooling that generates SBOMs? I wasn't quite sure.
I definitely think the adoption and consumption is going to be the bigger problem. There are things that are already working on the generation. I want us to help support those, definitely. If Steve were here, he would be asking that we ensure we're not getting to focus on, for instance, only SPDX tools, only Linux Foundation tools, only, but certainly support all the free and open source software tools that generate SBOMs, yay. But the place where I think we can make the biggest difference, and to your point earlier, is that adoption and consumption and making that easy. Because there's going to be a lot of really big companies that are already going to be creating SBOMs. And if they're sending it as a vendor to their smaller companies, then, that smaller company is just going to look at it and go, well, that's nice, and not do anything with it. And that's not going to help the overall ecosystem. So and I think that's a really huge gap we can fix.
I'm Chris, you just raised your hand. Is there something you can add?
Yeah, I'm gonna go in parallel with that. I think the creation side. I think a SIG on SBOM creation everywhere, may be valuable. Maybe this is the one, right? But I agree with Tracy. What I see missing is, explaining how any of this goes together. Now what? I have an SBOM, now what? Right. So, and to be clear on my background and motivation, so I work for an SBOM tooling company, Cybeats, and so managing SBOMs and so forth, is a sort of a day job thing. But even that, what's going on today is pedantic and boring, right? What needs, what every group I'm part of has a hard time, raising their eyes up enough to look forward, is how I got into this. The DBOM, the attestation ecosystem, open source thing, right? That is still a little bit too far ahead of the curve, but it speaks to all these issues. What I see is what I was trying to achieve that got me into all this, and what I still see coming is, I want to say that I'm Chris and I want to know, what I should know about this mouse, which may be who shoveled the sand into the furnace to make the chips or not, right? And that's policy, and it's connecting all those supply chain players together. And I think contract language has more to do with all of this than any of the tools in tech. When we look back, 5 and 10 and more years from now. So again, maybe this, there's a lot of, every group is doing great stuff. Tom Aldridge's SBOM forum has sort of spun out informally. I think it's done good work with naming. But what I see as the yawning gap is anyone standing back and saying, all right, here's the world you're moving into, and SBOMs fit here. Right. /rant. Except for
Okay,
use
let me
case.
try to sum up everything
pretty
I've
horrible.
heard, and you can all say if I'm right or wrong, or maybe I'm missing something. So I feel like there's a consensus that we don't want to dwell on specific tooling, because there's already a lot of specific tools for creating SBOMs, which there is a lot of, and there are going to be countless places to find that information, right? Go to SPDX, go to Cycling DX, go to whatever. There's a ton of projects, there's a ton of generators. We want to put our focus on, I guess we'll hand wave the creation and say, now that it exists, what do we start to do with it? Is that accurate?
I would vote for that, but
Now,
yeah.
the one
Plus
thing
one.
I will say, and this was a big discussion point during the creation of this, and it's something Tracy brought up a little while ago, was, for example, if I have a build pipeline, today I have to heavily modify it to create SBOMs. Whereas one of the intents was to just add a lot of this functionality directly into build systems, for example. So like if I'm running Jenkins, I don't have to set up special SBOM generators. It just poops out an SBOM at the end. And is that in scope or out of scope, do we think, for this?
I personally think in scope, because it furthers the ability to adopt SBOM, because it's offloading the initial logic to generate them, and using something like GitHub and reusable actions, making like codified examples would only be helpful, I'd imagine.
I think it's a good.
I agree. Yeah, I agree that it's certainly in scope, but I think it's in scope in as much as it's something we want to help to facilitate and make sure is happening. And not necessarily that we are the ones doing it, right? And so perhaps a committee of this group would be to look at these tools to advise, consult Jenkins, GitHub, GitLab, choose your poison, and work with them to make sure that this is actually happening on their side, and that it's happening in a relatively consistent way. And that's going to be a bigger problem. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think the question was well stated, because I think, I think both the last two speakers have said, it's not really hand waving, but hand waving is a good way to say it, because I think we should all recognize the La Brea tar pits of a lot of this, right? And, I think it's safe to say, that you are going to be, exactly what Vicky just said, your system is going to be automatically creating these things in the future, regardless, but there's a lot of detail. And to my last rant, I think what we can do on that side is help frame how that gets done. If we if we are capable to look a little bit farther forward, look at, how the larger scale integrated system is going to be working, we can say, and that's why right now you're going through this process with Jenkins, because we're just going through this phase where the automation is going to be built in Jenkins next version. And here's how to walk through that. If
Is that
makes
really your last rant? I don't think it is, Chris.
a previous. Yes.
Okay, so I'm making an attempt here to give us a one paragraph, like a 2-line scope.
You're a hero.
Love it.
I've tried to incorporate what you guys are talking about. I'm just going to read it and see if, we're even close. Securing the open source ecosystem will require making the adoption and consumption of SBOM data easy at all levels, source, build, and OS. The goal of the SBOMs Everywhere workstream is to identify methods and processes to leverage SBOM data across the broader ecosystem, including tools, interoperability, and culture.
Oh my God, that's art.
I like
My one question is that OS we have, that's really there's too many things in our world that go OS. Is that open source? Is that operating system?
Oh, I'm sorry. Operating
okay.
system.
Let's call it deploy maybe, because if we look at the current I think NTIA created it. I'm not starting this conversation right now, so dear God, no one comment on this, but they're grouping SBOMs into source, build, and deploy. And I know you can argue there's way more stages, but
That's fine. For now, I'll just call it source, build, and deploy.
Talk to Kate. She's going to create a subgroup just to bike shed this one to death. And that's great.
Whether it be, the operating system or where you deployed it, what that looks like, that's fine with me.
Exactly.
So I've changed it to deploy, and if we have to change that, that's fine.
Perfect.
But does this capture the scope of what this work stream is trying to do?
As is being discussed here, individual words, who knows? But I love the arc of it. Yeah, I think that's the right way to say it.
I think this is a really great iteration. Awesome.
Yep, absolutely.
Tracy for the win.
Seriously.
Thank you. You guys have all said this. I just typed it.
As an author, believe me, there's a lot of value in being able to phrase things correctly. More than just being able to yammer like we are.
Okay, we got time check. We're at 46. This meeting technically ends at 55, and I'd kind of like to do that just because we all have enough damn meetings. But let's say another 10 minutes ish to kind of tear through this. So this is good though. I think defining a scope that's a big one. So I'm really happy if this is our output for the day. This is great. So
we need also a mission. Do you think we could come up with a mission in 15 minutes? I know that might be hard, but we're all got our juices flowing. There should be a way to create a mission statement.
Yeah.
Oh, hope springs eternal.
No, I don't know if we can do a mission statement before we look at some of this other stuff though, because the steps we want to do will define the mission statement, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Or we can kind of make a really brief, something like this, but we're going to iterate on it, sort of mission to give us some sort of target.
Sure.
As long as we all know it's carved in Jello. Sorry, Jello TM.
So we all watch Tracy work.
I know, everybody got quiet, and now I can't write anything because nobody's talking.
We talk about completely other things and give you space. I just can't talk and compose at the same time.
Here's what I want to do for the next couple of minutes, just because we'll let Tracy can type this, and I think that's great. And I don't want to stare at it because I feel like that creates a lot of pressure. There's nothing more frustrating than when like a group of people is staring at you while you try to do a menial task. It's like, I can't click buttons anymore. But okay, so we kind of have this description. This came from, it's got some steps. The second section is kind of more missiony, I think, than the first. But I think these 3 bullet points capture the what, I guess. Would the first section is maybe the why a little bit. So I think something for us to keep in mind, and I don't expect us to do all this right now. I just want us to like look at this as a whole, and we can work on it during the week. But this group isn't going to do any of the work, right? That's the understanding. We're going to create plans and suggestions and bring them to the OpenSSF and say, we think this is what should be done. And they can say, you're dumb, go away, or they could potentially fund it. And that's kind of the intent. So that's something we need to keep in mind too. Like, this is not us doing this work. And I
Yeah.
think like this is where work with the developer tools ecosystem, right? Like, we are not contributing, we are not building, we are going to work with the developer tools ecosystem to do that.
I think it, at first when you said it, I was like, oh, I don't know, that kind of feels like splitting hairs. But as I look at this document, it does make sense that we should, what does done look like for this group, essentially, right? Is this group's purpose to set up the plan, set up the subgroups that will go out and do the actual work, and then, disappear, right? Our work is done here, peace out, we're gone. Individuals can then move into the implementation of the plan if they wish, but this group as we know it, would that dissolve? And so really defining what done looks like for this group, what is our raison d'etre, right? Why are we here, the number 42 sort of crap? But I think that might be kind of a good thing for us to figure out. Because if the answer is, if you're here, you are also going to be, once we finish this, we're going to have a next stage of things. And my vet is calling, I need to go. Sorry, all.
Okay, so I took a stab at the mission. The mission of the work stream will be to encourage collaboration between SBOM producers, consumers, and maintainers. Identify common barriers to the adoption of SBOM generation and make recommendations for creating friction-free open source tools that make SBOMs everywhere easy.
I think it may just be right. It's certainly a solid start. It doesn't give me the epiphany the first one does, but it's logical. It makes sense. And to what Vicky was talking about, and again, just thinking out loud, so what I am trying to achieve for myself, and this group may be the thing, is a vision of the architecture of how this stuff all fits together. SBOMs and are part of it, are an example of the artifacts of supply chain attestation and whatnot. But that architecture.
Wait, what did you say? Vision of the architecture? You said vision of the
architecture.
Vision of the.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Yep.
And I think once we figure out what that is, it needs to be maintained over time, right? I think this is a sort of long-term issue that, again, some definition of we has to keep an eye on. A lot of the sort of long-term internet governance bodies, right? It's not a matter of running it or dictating it, just saying, here's how, here's what the structure looks like now.
I agree.
Okay, I added that in there.
What camera in your hand is that?
Oh, it was up. Now I'm gonna lower it because I forgot what.
I love that.
So I think that's a really good point Chris made about the architecture, because to date, this document and this group has had an obsession with tools, specifically tools. And I think it's bigger than that, especially if we start incorporating consumption, which we've not talked about in the past. Cameron, is your hand up for others?
Yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. So one kind of element for us, at least, and why this is a point of importance, I guess, from this, like viewing the working group as something that should be producing very like valuable context to inform downstream processes is, from my perspective, I guess, like a worthy pursuit. One, like we are actually going to enter into a funded effort to do research that I'd like to kick into the open source. So I guess that, yeah, Bunny, do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, so are you saying, are you asking whether those elements are fitting into like the cultural component that Tracy put in the scope, or the interoperability component?
Yeah, interoperability. Because as we start looking at like the full life cycle of software, especially when you talk about air gap being the end kind of state, really defining what elements have to make it all the way through and starting at the source. And that actually is going to be a research effort. So, you know, I don't have any answers to that, but what I would like to do is to be able to bring findings from that effort to this forum.
Okay, good, but I'm gonna call that out of scope for this particular discussion, because I think that's something way bigger and different.
Agreed.
But that's cool. You should write more about that and tell us.
I know we're,
Okay.
I know we're at
We're
time.
at 55, which is the technical time this meeting ends. So I'd like to wrap this all up. That way we're not like all dashing for the door. I think this is really good. I think these two things Tracy wrote are phenomenal. And thank you, Tracy, so much for doing that. And so
My pleasure.
I think
Likewise.
what I want to do now, and I'll spend some time, probably an hour or two for the rest of the week, is we have these current kind of efforts we started, which I think are all related to these steps. But I think trying to bucket all of this into existing efforts and creating new efforts for each of the items. And we want to rework some of this, because like, for example, we talk about you know, clients and SDKs. And again, this is extremely tool focused. And I feel like there is a consensus that we want to step away from the tooling a little bit maybe and go more towards, I'm going to steal Chris's term, architecture, to describe this, which I like a lot.
Yeah, I'll just agree. And I think the last comment, yeah, when you start looking at it as a network architecture, the differences are stark, right? You know, there's not a lot of flow. Things are created to not just stay in the same place. And until we start thinking in that way, it just, anyways, I think it helps a lot.
I agree. And I think to date, most of the tooling and even advice has been very, I don't know what to call it, componentized, you know, just very singular. I'm going to focus on this one place. So what I'm going to do now is write kind of a brief explanation of what happened. I want to send it to the mailing list, and I am opposed to having lots of meetings like this one, because I think we should be able to function in an asynchronous manner and work through GitHub and things like Google Docs. So that's what I'm going to encourage. I'm not going to schedule another meeting like this because I don't want to. So I'm going to write this up. We'll try to lay out some of the work that needs to be done moving forward. And then I guess we can kind of go from there. But I really want to make sure we can keep this going, because I feel like this makes sense to me and I like it. So I want to thank you all for the help. This has been a lovely use of an hour, I think.
Thanks, folks.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
I'll
you
talk
all.
to y'all
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye-bye.